Hi, greetings. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our afternoon session with Catapult Lockdown Virtual Salon for my discussion this afternoon with Sonja Dumas. Before we begin, I'd like to express huge thanks to the Catapult partners, including the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, and Fresh Milk, for making this series a reality and really making these salons happen. Before I begin, please feel free, just so you know, to ask your questions, which we'll get to in the question and answer period, which will be coming in about at, let's say, 4:45. So feel free throughout to send your questions to the chat as we go forward in our conversation this afternoon. So today we have Sonja Dumas, who is a performer, choreographer, writer, filmmaker, teacher, and arts development consultant who lives in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. She is a founder of Continuum Dance Project and initiator, co-founder, and co-director of COCO Dance Festival. She also is very much rooted aesthetically in the historical and contemporary phenomena of this region. So it's wonderful to have this moment to explore with her her own kind of creative practice and development over the last few decades. Okay, so over to you, Sonja. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I mean, this is just wonderful. Caribbean people can talk to each other in different ways. This is great.
It's fantastic. And it's wonderful to have you this afternoon and to just have this opportunity to share and to delve a bit deeper in the Caribbean that unites us all, right? And
Yes.
using arts as that pivot through which we begin
Exactly.
to engage.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
A lot of us here say that arts are one of the essential services.
Yeah.
It gets us through. It gets us through. It gets us through these times.
It's been our steady companion, our real steady companion. So I was hoping that you were able to connect earlier to our conversation with this young, dynamic dancer, performer, choreographer from St. Martin, Jonathan Van Ameren.
Yes.
And so I just find it such a wonderful moment in terms of looking at the now in terms of what people are doing in other island spaces, in spaces with different colonial histories. And we know the island in which you hail from have a very colorful colonial past as well, that has shaped a very dynamic cosmopolitan space and history and identity. Yes. And so if you could just speak a little bit about the space of Trinidad and Tobago, the very cosmopolitanness of it, its diversity, and how that has helped you position yourself in terms of your creative practice. And then we'll move into some other things as we go forward.
When I think about Trinidad and Tobago, I think about the word access because of our sort of, it's a sort of hackneyed word, multicultural, but because of our multicultural kind of dynamic, something that we've acknowledged, many moons ago. I mean, it's all the rage now, but I mean, for centuries, that is what our sort of psyche was built on, in a sense.
Right.
And in terms of that, access to different cultures, like just one block away from each other, kind of thing is what I think is so rich and empowering for us. And the fact that even in our food, in our sort of day-to-day engagement with each other, it doesn't even have to be in an artistic space. There's so many different sets of imagery coming to us. There's so many different sets of options coming to us that the plate is full. And so we take, and we take from any part of the plate and make it ours. And I think that is one of the most sort of enriching moments for me as a dancer, a dance maker, that I can I can pull from different things, and they all feel very comfortable, and they're not foreign, they're not alien to me on that level, because I live it with other people in the space. Right. So I think for Trinidad and Tobago, that's quite a phenomenon for us.
Right. And I think that very diversity, that very multiplicity of cultures that share space creates a particular type of artist, I find, I find many creatives that I've met in Trinidad straddle multiple spheres of the creative kind of continuum, right? It's as though that access and agility has given you license without even having to question it, a certain license to not just dabble, but really invest and engage in multiple idioms to bring forth the message that you have. And you yourself straddling, I wouldn't even call it a divide because you don't make it seem that way, but straddling the spheres of film and dance. And so when you said a dance maker, I was like, well, she's also a filmmaker. You know, that kind of, you know, that certain accordion-like elasticity.
Yes.
And so you can just think about what brought you to film. Or I don't know which way you started first. Perhaps they started.
No, definitely dance. I started in dance, and you know, from a very young age.
Yeah,
I love that whole movement thing. You know, even when I was a very young child, maybe 5 or whatever, I think that was where I went to.
Right.
But what I find in film is the ability to amplify movement a lot of the time in a way that I maybe won't do it on a stage. And so a lot of my films have to do with dance, either dance history, or they're experimental films, or they're films that I kind of build on the rhythm of my own choreographic process. Because I always say I choreograph films because I came to choreography and to dance first. That I take the rhythm of that, or my approach to the rhythm, and try to build that into the rhythm of the film. And I just like the aesthetic. It's something that appeals to me to look through a lens and to see how I can shape a story. It's the same thing that I do on stage. You shape a story, but then you're working in 3 dimensions on the stage. You're working in 2 dimensions in film, ultimately. And so that I like that sort of challenge about having to work in those different dimensionalities.
Yeah, because one of the questions that I was thinking of, and if you wouldn't mind, we're going to bring up the first image, but one of the questions I was thinking of for you was, you know, this level of your corporal self, and how does your corporal self as a dancing being and a creator of movement impact your cinematic eye in terms of what you bring to our own lenses and what you allow us to see.
Yes.
You know? Are you also, do you move behind the camera? Are you holding the camera? Are you seeing the choreography unfold? So I'm just interested in this kind of relationship between the corporal and the cinematic for you.
Right. Well, a lot of my approach to my dance practice is that you go into a kind of structured improvisation first. And so when I have a sort of plan when I get to the space of film, when I'm filming something that has to do with dance or movement, but I have that space where anything could happen, and I let the dancers know that. There are very few times where I have very rigid choreography for the screen. That might happen more on the stage than it does on the screen, because on the screen, because you can take your camera allows you to zoom in or to come in to a space, or to a very sort of what you call in the film world an extreme close-up, for instance, in the way that the dance that is on a stage doesn't. So that you don't want to miss those moments. So I keep it very open, because there might be some flick of the skirt or something that I'm like, wow, do that again. Let me just get that again. So I take that little piece, and then the skirt starts to dance on the screen in the way that complements the dancer for the next shot. Right. So that you have to be open to those moments where the universe is giving you this gift. So take it.
I see that. And you know what I love about, you know, your politics and the way in which the environment and its conservation is so deeply important to you, and how film allows you to really situate it up in center. So even in that last image with this beautiful frame of this this draping train of dress in the midst of all of this vegetation with the water in the distance, and this kind of sense where, as Caribbean bodies, as brown and beige and black bodies, we occupy and inhabit this incredible vegetated space.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
it's quite
And
beautiful.
we often take it for granted because it's all around us all the time.
Mm.
But believe me when I say, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, people who are outside of the region in temperate situations or in arid situations or so are always absolutely inundated with senses
Right.
of oh my God, it's so green, it's so lush, it's so this. And it's a blessing to be in a space like that.
Yeah, that
It's
we
a
often take
blessing.
it for granted.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, but it's really a blessing.
Yeah, it's, I'm reminded, Jonathan, in his reflection this afternoon, early afternoon, was speaking about, the sea all around him, that you can't be in St. Martin and not have, the sea all around. And you in a petrol state,
Yes.
a more urban space.
Yes.
But there are spaces in Trinidad and certainly in Tobago where the sea is all around. But I wanted to hear a bit more from you about the sea and water, the saline waters or sweet waters, what it means for you in your own kind of, for your own exploration within your creative practice.
I think the sea and bodies of water in general play a tremendous role in my work because choreographic work, either on screen or off. Because again, living in this space, you are confronted by the seas, those big bodies of water. You're not only the water, but the histories within that water. And what happens is that it becomes a space of so much memory, but so much creation as well. And also how the body moves because of it. How do we flow through our own lives because the rivers and the seas are flowing around us? And again, it may not be something that we take into consideration every moment of every day, but I'm certain that it affects us in some way because we are island people for the most part in the Caribbean. Some are not island people, but still, they are still around the sea.
Right.
And I had a Kenyan friend who's a choreographer from Kenya, and he says, do you feel isolated in an island? I mean, it's only sea around you. And I'm like, I feel completely the opposite.
Right.
I feel that all the possibilities in the world are available to me because I can go. I can see where the horizon is. I can see where possibilities lie.
Right.
And he was fascinated by that concept because he thought I would feel so isolated because there's a sort of, I guess, attitude or assumption that that an island is isolating, and for me, an island is expansive.
Oh, completely.
So that is where I really realized, that was years ago, and I realized, I really love where I live.
Indeed, and that ability to have it accessible and to work with it on different levels. Right?
Exactly.
Do you do site-specific work within this at the spaces of bodies of water?
Most definitely. And some of my dancers, they know me, and they're like, "Oh God, do we have to get there for 6 o'clock in the morning?" I'm like, "Yes, we do," because I want a certain light.
Yeah.
And that's what comes at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we go to some space, some beach or whatever, and we do experimental work and that kind of thing. We have people looking at us strangely sometimes, but that's okay, because that's part of the process. And they're fascinated. People look at us, what are those people doing as they walk along the beach? They're not fisherwomen. Then what are they, kind of thing. But they stop and they look and they ask questions, which I think is one of the important parts about art. If you're making art for yourself, that's fine. If you're making art for others, if you're trying to bring others into the process, answer their questions, bring them into the picture. And, because they're curious, they don't know.
Right. So include them into
exactly in the process,
creative process.
Exactly.
Wow. In terms of your dancers, are they, would you say, because I know quite a few choreographers and artistic directors in the region from the late Eduardo Rivera in Cuba,
Mhm.
and, you know, the late Professor Rex Nettleford, uh, looked to the streets and looked to what we would call regular bodies, people in
Right.
their stance and in their day-to-day activity to find dancers, you
Mhm.
know. And I'm wondering, in terms of your process, how do you include bodies that may not have gone through the same rigors of training, and then kind of hone them into the kind of dancer you're looking for? Or is it there a mixture of the kind of dancers you work with, in terms of placing your work on?
But
Do you
yes, well, the core of my company are really trained dancers. They're classically trained in ballet, modern, but they're also classically trained in Trini.
I gotcha.
So they need to be able to whine. You have
You
to be
need to
able to
walk on that
whine to be
tree,
in my
walk on that
company,
tree.
okay?
Indeed.
So they understand my process, that my process is different. A lot of the time I border on dance theater because
Mm,
a lot of my work, as you mentioned before, you know, you observe the fact that there's politics in the work. So I would address the environment or the status of women,
yeah,
or you know, this sort of desperate need to have all the latest beauty products or what have you in the work. And a lot of the time I go to text for that as well.
yes.
So that not everybody has to be, you know, absolutely trained at a certain level or what have you in terms of formal dance training. But I think it's more of the attitude. Okay, how do
Right.
you approach the work that I'm trying to do? I call the dance company, my dance company, Continuum Dance Project, because it's a continuum of people. So I have people ranging from ages, say, 19 or 20 to 50 something. That's the first thing. Okay, it's a lot. It's a very wide range of ages.
Wonderful.
It's a very wide range of philosophical approaches. A lot of the times after rehearsal, we sit down and discuss politics,
Right,
discuss an
right.
issue that irks us, or that has, you know, it's been brought to our attention or what have you, because I think that's really part and parcel of how we approach the work. You
Right.
see,
And where
and
does history and memory fit into this continuum for you?
for
Is
me,
there,
yes, there is a very, I can't really separate my work from the history of the region. And that's why the sea, as I said, is so important, because the sea is what brought such deep transformations from the time that the first peoples were here. Even when the first peoples were here by themselves,
right.
they traversed the region across the seas. So the
Mm-hmm.
sea comes back to the location of history of the region.
Right.
And I think that's why I'm so preoccupied with it, in a sense, because I see so much, there's so much to mine there. There's so much to
Indeed.
figure out still.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then how, as I said, do we embody that? So the embodiment comes to sort of link to the history. It's like, what is it in our DNA, psychic DNA, physical DNA, what have you, that
Spiritual, emotional.
exactly spiritual, emotional, that has to do with our histories. We have a
Mm,
colonial history, we have a pre-colonial history as well. Okay,
indeed.
and we have a post-colonial one. So how do these things intersect to bring us to our contemporary moment? And
Mm,
how do we contend with those issues through the body, so that my medium is the body or the lens?
yeah,
That's how I look at it.
beautiful. And speaking of the contemporary and your engagement with this moment,
Mhm.
I'm really excited about the work that you're doing with youth,
Mhm.
and also the work that you're doing in terms of building bridges, to bring different collectives, different bodies, different communities together through your COCO Dance Festival, Contemporary Dance Festival. Would you mind? I want bringing up one of the images we have that explores a stage piece. And if you could speak a bit about what was the kind of catalyst for creating this dance festival, and also what does the contemporary mean for you when you're reflecting on the contemporary and youth culture?
Right. Well, we started the festival, some choreographer friends and myself started it in 2009 because we felt that there was such a need at that time for young people to express themselves. I had just started along with another colleague, the dance program at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And we felt that there was not enough opportunity for the young people to actually perform, feel their own creativity. So we made this festival for the young students of the University of Trinidad and Tobago, of the University of the West Indies, for them to apply to the festival with a work. So they had to create a work before. Okay, so that again sort of made them think in a different way, and then come and just explore what it meant to really contend with the stage, trying to give them as best highest production values that we could, and trying to let them find their own way artistically, right? Yes. And we kept encouraging, and we still encourage them to take risks, okay? Wonderful. Take artistic risks. To see, so if you think something is not what what your other friends are doing, that's fine. Try it. It's an experiment. Okay, right. That's how you figure out your own aesthetic. And that piece, actually, the one that we just saw the picture of, that one is called VAPS, and that again is rooted in history. VAPS in Trinidad and Tobago means doing something on a whim, suddenly. On a whim, right? Okay. Yes. Catch a VAPS. Right? Yeah. Caught a VAPS. You just caught this fanciful moment, right? A caught a vibe, and you just went with it, right? But what I did.
So there's an element of spontaneity, of adventure.
Exactly. Right. So you see the dancers there, and they are actually, half of the piece is maybe about 12 minutes long, and half of that piece, they're shuffling on the floor. And they're doing all sorts of interesting sounds and movements, but they're just really shuffling on the floor. And that's because I actually rooted it in what Guadeloupe has as the goka. Right? And Lena Blue, who's a very well-known proponent of the technique.
Indigenous technique.
Right. Exactly. I based it on her movements, on
Wonderful.
her. Yes. So you have a sense of
the biggity.
Sort of the biggity. Exactly. And so I had to tell the dancers about the biggity. Okay. Yeah. And we based the dance on that. And once they did that and they embodied that, the sky was the limit. And I'm really happy to say that this piece has been selected as one of the pieces that is being studied at the CAPE examinations throughout the region now. And I think, thank you, because again, it speaks to the Caribbean type of aesthetic and Caribbean impulses, because, everybody has a different way of approaching things. But the fact is that still, I think people can see the Caribbean-ness in it. And that's one of the things I try to do. Yeah.
It's incredible just even to think about that connectivity across the linguistic divide. There's a way that I think the arts have been more successful than even aspects of our scholarship, where we're hindered by words that we can't unpack because they're spoken or written in a language that we haven't yet mastered or could unpack. But through movement, we are able to traverse those blocks without any problem, and so even I remember working with Lena, and Lena was saying everybody has their own bigidi,
Well, this is it.
That out of balance while being in balance, that moment of shift, that moments of that space, and all that could happen in that space. Yes.
Because in the Haitian construct, it's called casse, right?
Exactly.
And in the Trinidad and Tobago context, it's called a break. But it's the same percussive moment that allows you to suspend yourself in the moment. You see?
To be in that limbo.
Exactly. So that is what I was trying to capture with this particular piece.
Yes, and limbo, speaking of which, is also quite close to you, right? That's that liminality.
Yes.
Of space, of time, of movement, of shifting across, of traversing. Like, I was introduced to limbo as a wake dance, right? So I studied it as a wake dance. And of course, many would have first encountered it on cruise ships and those things as a tourist kind of folly. But it's so deeply rooted in something beyond, something transcendent. What have you explored and discovered in your own reflection on limbo so far?
Well, I have a film that I did about 10 years ago, which was based on one of our greatest proponents of the limbo dance, but in the sort of cabaret setting or the nightclub setting, called Julia Edwards. But in my research for that, you come across these different narratives about how limbo might have come to Trinidad and Tobago, and certainly in particular Trinidad. And as you say, it is a wake dance, but how did it get here? How was it that we don't really find it in Africa? So this brings me back to the sea. Did it develop on the sea for a reason? On the ship. Okay, there are theories about how it could have developed there. When I was speaking to the older heads of limbo and the older impresarios of Trinidad and Tobago who used to promote limbo as a nightclub act, their mothers and grandmothers would have told them these stories about how the limbo might have come on the ship, or because of that ship, the things that the African people were forced to do on the ship. You see. So it is. That is. I'm not a limbo dancer. I think my knees won't allow me to be a limbo dancer. But I hear you. But I'm absolutely fascinated by that whole thing, because, for instance, the limbo of the wake actually starts with the bar high.
High, exactly, and that's the night. And in Jamaica,
it's the low. Sorry, it goes low and then it goes up high. Okay, because you're going from the depths of limbo up to heaven. You see. But in the cabaret or nightclub tourist version, it's more exciting to go from high to low. Right. You see? So it's interesting how when you take away the religiosity or the religious aspect of it, or the spiritual aspect of it, you invert the actual movement. So that's an interesting development, but that still doesn't tell us exactly where it came from. You see, because again, awake had to do with a sort of syncretism between the African tradition and the Christian tradition, the European Christian tradition. So that. Where does the actual movement come from?
Okay. Yeah, because when you look across the, those territories that would have informed our movement vocabulary, from the Gold Coast, whether Yoruba Fon, Eweka, Akan, and then moving into the Bantu traditions.
Yes.
The Bantu comes closest with their Congo cruciform and that idea of because when you look at limbo dancers moving from their umbilical cord as that source, like really trained dancers who make that connection, and then they lower from there. That center, right? That becomes where the medicine is. That links you between and where within at least a Congo cosmology, the two spheres of existence, the living and the dead, descending into that Kalunga, where the Haitians will call the traversing through Guinea or to Guinea. So this traversing through the bellies of the water across the Kalunga line to then come to the other side. So there's just but interestingly, in the traditional Bantu dances that I've seen, both in studio and in kind of traditional setting, it's more upright and it's circular. So we see this circular action. You see it in Kumina for sure. But this kind of lowering and crossing, that's
liminality.
Diasporic reality, right? definitely a new world, if we will, invention in terms of based on our own histories of how we
Right.
got here, and then the belief, the kind of cosmologies that help us understand our return. But so much is also about how do we return to where we were taken
Right.
from. And
Exactly.
I find limbo presents such amazing possibilities to explore that continuum in a very
Yes,
broad spectrum.
indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. So
Uh,
it's really an ongoing conversation, as
yeah.
many of these movements are. I mean, you find every year, I find out something different about some dance movement, or some
Mm.
of the origin of it. It's just fascinating. It's just a whole gulf of information. It's
And it's to
wonderful.
get in the trenches and to do the
Yes,
work.
exactly, exactly.
Before I get into your present engagement and work, I just wanted to remind our listeners near and far, please feel free to post your questions because we will have time, about 15, 20 minutes towards the end of our program to begin to really engage further with Sonja. So please don't hesitate to post those questions in our chat. But I want to take us now to Sonja Madras.
Ah.
Right? And if we could bring up our final image, but this cloth that echoes across this region in so many ways. I was just thinking when I saw it, I'm like, the only space that I could think of in the region where it isn't as present would be the Hispanophone Caribbean.
Right,
But
right.
from the Dutch, the French, the English, and there is a reason for that too, in terms of that those kind of colonial linkages and the commercial linkages and so forth. But what brought you to Madras, and what is this your mapping of the Madras, and so that's one part, and then what does this mean for you aesthetically as part of your engaged practice as an activist, as an advocate, as part of your advocacy, and as part of your politics?
Right. Well, what brought me to Madras is dance again, initially, because in a lot of the folk dances of a lot of the region, including Trinidad and Tobago, you would find that the Madras is part of the traditional wear, as what we call in Trinidad the overskirt, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's a skirt that goes over the white skirt, and it's open in the front, and you manipulate it with your hands.
Like what you would
And
see in ballet, piqué, and
exactly,
those.
ballet and piqué, and you also have different accessories like the foulard, which is the scarf,
Stop.
and then you might have a head tie, either with the accent of the madras or the whole head tie is madras with an accent of a solid color. So that is what, that's where my awareness of Madras began. And I've been to Martinique countless times, as Guadeloupe also, but more so Martinique. And, you can't walk through Fort-de-France and not see a set of shops selling Madras,
Selling
right?
Madras, the whole regalia.
And I just found it absolutely beautiful. And I would buy all sorts of things, fabric, dresses. I even have some flowers out of Madras, some I just thought it was wonderful. And for me it became very Creole and Caribbean.
Yeah.
That's one of the
Yeah.
markers for me. But what brought me to this particular moment, would you believe, is COVID. Because as you'll see on for the picture, what happened is a friend of mine who owns a small business. I just called up to see it's a sort of semi-rough part of town that she has it in, and I asked her, "How are you doing? Is it everything is okay and whatever?" I just called up to find out, and she said, "Look, I'm fine. I actually just made some masks for my employees, and they're out of Madras." And I said, "You know what? I want one. I just don't know. There was this thing in me, like, I need a Madras mask. If I'm going to have to
Cover
guard
up.
against some deadly disease, I want a Madras mask because I'm in the
want
Caribbean."
to know what I looking like.
And so I got a couple from her, and it then I started to interrogate my own feelings about how very much I wanted this mask, and why is it I wanted this mask as opposed to any other mask that I could have bought in a pharmacy or drugstore or something.
Right.
And it really was because it's that fabric is so special to me. And it's because again, it's a signifier of Caribbeanness on a very sort of deep level for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what brought me to it. And I posted something online with me in the mask, the same image. And people responded like crazy. They're like, yeah, this is great, you know?
Yeah.
And because in the post, I said, you know, I want to take this a little further. I want to investigate the history of madras, of which I know a little bit, but not that much.
Yeah.
And then I also want to look at how it was treated within the sort of 19th century moment, and then also the 20th and 21st century moments.
Yeah, because I'm sure you're finding this kind of a kind of where it goes from an indigenous cloth of othering, right? So this is what the folk do, and then moving from this othering movement to this reclamation.
Yes.
When you have like the Jeune Creole in St. Lucia, and in Dominica, the Creole Day, when people come out brandishing with such pride their madras, right? And so it's no longer, you know, in that kind of marginalization of these communities, but in fact allowing these Creole identities to really stand firmly in modernity, right? Firmly in the now, in the contemporary. Go ahead.
Yeah, but what's interesting though is that I had my first sort of Zoom meetup yesterday with a lot of madras enthusiasts, right?
Yeah.
And some of that, what came out was very interesting because some people are actually rejecting the madras because of the bloody history with which it is associated. And the history of subjugation. So they're taking the contemporary moment actually to say, well, look, I don't want to be in madras because it means this or that, which is a very interesting development, because here I am thinking, oh, it's all nice and Caribbean. And other people are saying, yeah, I'm Caribbean too, but I don't think that way, which I love because, again, it starts to interrogate it as to where it will go from here.
Yeah.
And so while a lot of people, and on the other side of the spectrum, there was a young woman there from the Virgin Islands, and in the chat, I had in fact invited her to speak, that she is making the madras, she's actually lobbying to get legislation to get a particular pattern of madras as something that is going to be the official Virgin Islands, one of the official Virgin Islands sort of declaration, right, of
their own patrimony and
patrimony. Exactly. So you have these interesting sort of
developments that are kind of contradictory in moments.
Yes, but that is so Caribbean.
It is.
It's so Caribbean because from one island to the other, yes, we are here and we are in the sea, between the sea and the Atlantic Ocean. But because we are islands, we have a way of developing our own approach to something that is certainly not, it's not groupthink. You see?
Yeah, it's very. Wow.
Yeah. So it was a very sobering moment for me yesterday when because most of the people were very sort of, they embraced the madras. And a couple of them said, well, yes, we embrace it, but this is, understand that there's also this theory about it. And it's linked to class as well in some territories, in some countries.
Very much so. And the kind of the patterns in particular.
Exactly.
And the kind of the weight of the fabric that is used and all of that. Yeah.
Because there are different types of madras. There's a very expensive one, and then there's the one that's much cheaper.
It's almost like kente in that way.
Exactly.
Kente cloth of Ghana.
Exactly. And then the whole discussion about the African fabrics that have been, people think they're African, but they're really Dutch, you know?
Yeah, like when you see, it's fascinating, like even in looking at Suriname, where madras is very popular among the Maroon communities, right? Exactly. And how they interpret and use madras spiritually, religiously. Like, so for example, upon the when one is in mourning, or family or community is mourning the passing of someone, there would be a madras that's dedicated to that
Yes.
period, of which people would wear
Yes.
that. The madras is a mourning cloth. And then
Yes.
when we look to Jamaica, where the madras in revival is linked to the Indian spirits, right? And then it's also
Yes.
linked as a national fabric. It's a national,
Yes.
you don't see Miss Lou without her madras.
Right. Exactly.
So you have
Exactly.
these interesting spaces of pride and of also negation and
Right, and
erasure
contention,
and
really.
contention.
Yeah. But what I want to do with this whole project is to actually have an exhibition, and I must thank the Barbados Museum and Historical Society for helping out with the talk yesterday. They're the ones who hosted it on Zoom. And also, we're looking forward to maybe looking at this as a sense of a community museum, a community exhibition.
Yes.
And so it will be online, basically, at least in the first instance, because really and truly, because of all those disparate views, it does speak, but everybody had a very strong opinion, no matter whether it was negative
Pro
or
or
positive or
con,
in between or whatever. Everybody felt passionately about the madras.
Wow.
And that means that there's something in it that speaks to us as Caribbean people, because you don't hear that kind of conversation outside of the Caribbean about that type of fabric.
Indeed.
So I think, in the first instance, we're trying to make an exhibition which is a community of combinations of whatever people think of it in their own spaces, you see? But we're also looking at the history, and all that too has a very complicated history. It's not as simple as just the East India Trading Company having gone and got it and brought it over here for the Africans to wear, etc. Right? Because there might be a connection with Nigeria. There might be a connection with Madras itself, and how that discussion, that dialogue between Africa and India happened long before the Europeans came into the picture. So there are all these different threads of history that speak to how we perhaps approach the fabric now.
Right. So that's really fascinating, which leads me to the last question I want to pose before we open up for questions. And it's speaking specifically about the Caribbean and where, you and how you center the Caribbean in your own creative work and practice. How does it animate it? In this moment, we're seeing Madras, but it has been a drive for you, and I'm curious in terms of how it has evolved over time, and yeah, we would leave that. Yeah, we'll go from there and then segue into questions and see.
One of the central sort of phenomena for me when it comes to the body, the Caribbean body, is the hip. And I've spent a lot of time, I joke about whining and so forth, but I've spent a lot of time trying to examine how we speak with our hips in the Caribbean. And it's not just women either, because as we know, ways, that's it. I have a former student from the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and he has a class called Pelt. Okay.
Oh, sweet. I did.
But the fact is that when you look at the Caribbean body, I've been trained in ballet, I've been trained in modern, and I learned folk technique to some extent, but I wasn't trained as deeply in that as I was in the other genres. But now, as I grow into more of my choreography over it takes decades to figure stuff out sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
And so now I understand much more clearly about my own process, what's important to embody for me, my choreography and my dancers. And I think I locate that. I start at the hip and I start with the upper body. Okay. And the way the gestures of the upper body start to, yes. Okay. Because I think those are the things, regardless of ethnicity, okay, that start to be pointers for how we approach movement in the Caribbean.
Indeed.
And how the fluidity of it, I think, is what the location of the isolation of the hip, or the isolation of the upper body, plus the fluidity of it. That is what I think attracts people who are not Caribbean to Caribbean movement.
Bringing us back to the water again.
There you go. You can't get away from it.
Yeah, get away. That sinuous,
Yes.
how we flow, how we flow.
How we flow. And I think that is really what drives me in terms of how I approach my choreography now.
Mm-hmm.
And how I want to make it Caribbean, as opposed, because the company Continuum Dance Project, I call it a sort of lab, a choreographic lab.
Lovely.
Okay?
Lovely.
And so we're trying to figure it out. And I mean, a lot of people, I love to see the fact that, or a lot of people in the Caribbean are trying to do the same thing, because that means that there's some kind of
it's a moment.
It's a moment.
It's a moment, yeah.
Where your own body starts to take over, rather than the principles of somebody else's rules or what have you. And I mean, it's very enriching.
And the idea that you don't even, while we have that as a substructure or superstructure, there is that knowledge that we have our own grammars.
Yes.
They're indigenous to our experiences that we could then manipulate and build with and construct amazing narratives.
Right, exactly. And we just have to recognize them.
Yeah, indeed. So let's open up and see if there's any questions for you, Sonja, so that we could continue. Okay, so we have here from Author Girl. Have you noticed a shift or impact as it relates to dance in Trinidad and Tobago, comparing the creative landscape when the festival was founded in 2009 as opposed to now? So is there been a shift in any way or impact?
Yes, most definitely. Two things have struck me. One is that those same young people who were very sort of green in their field in 2009, a lot of them have gone on to do different choreographic projects where their confidence was built through COCO to some extent, and they've just gone on and done their thing. So actually, our mission was accomplished, or has been accomplished on that level.
In terms of the capacity building.
Definitely. The other thing, however, I noticed is that, and I asked a couple of young choreographers about this about a year or so ago, is that COCO has now become a place where people do quote unquote serious work. And what I mean by that is that they come with all these heavy topics and subject matter. And so I asked a couple of them, I said, why is it that you're treating with such a heavy topic year in, year out? And they said that in this festival culture, they need an opportunity to quote unquote be serious at some point. Okay. So I in turn say to them, well, you can talk about a serious topic, but you can be humorous. A lot of the time, even in college, when I was choreographing, even in college when I was choreographing, a lot of the time I used to be very humorous in my choreography with a very serious statement. So I used to be known as a sort of humorous choreographer, right? And I treat with subject matter like race and class, etc., but through humor a lot of the time, or through satire in the work. But what I did find, as I said, is that COCO has become a center of serious topic sort of generation. And so it's just for us to manage that. We welcome them because they feel that they can say this in COCO. They have a statement to make and they make it.
Right.
And, it's going to be different this year a little bit because, of course, this is an online year and we've never had online before. But it's going to be, I think they'll still approach it in the same way in terms of trying to deal with serious topics. But I just want to encourage people that, it's not, a serious topic doesn't mean that you have to have a serious dance. It can be.
It's true, yeah, because and I think what it does do is it takes away from the very criticality of the festive. The
Yes.
festive spaces are critical spaces, so
Yes.
we only see them as spaces of frivolity.
Yes.
We don't get to do the work, that emancipatory work that festivals allow us to do and to enact.
Yes.
So, it'd be wonderful to see how much COCO impacts the festive space of the carnival, and vice versa, in terms of being symbiotic in that kind of way, but also inversing, if we can, in moments.
Definitely.
Yeah. Any other questions out there from our audience for Sonja this evening? We're waiting for them to upload, but it's amazing to hear just that the space, using the festive space as a means to engage in another way. It's really important. So we have a question from Jonathan Van Arneman about how can we get plugged into this very important conversation on Madras. I hear an next body one join in. That's what that's sounding like. You think? That's sounding like an ex-body one drape up.
Come on in. We want all the different opinions. We want everything that will speak to the Madras. Well, Jonathan, there are a couple ways. One is I can give you my one of my email addresses that you can contact me there. It's sjmd100 sjmd100@gmail.com. And you can also contact the Barbados Museum and ask to speak with or leave a message for Alessandra Cummins, who's the one who was able to put all of this together for us. What I'm going to do is what we decided yesterday, in fact, is that we're going to just sort of, as they say in the soca, we'll wheel and come again, right? So we're going to take some time in the next few weeks to figure out how we're going to start the sort of shaping of it as a community effort, as a Caribbean community. So if you have any thoughts on that, please email me. That's just fine, thank you. And we'll draw that into the mix of decision making. We also have to raise money, of course, because that, unfortunately, everybody,
where we are.
we know what has to happen. So it's going to take some time. It's not going to be overnight. This is going to take months of planning, research, etc. We were doing a lot of sharing the other day, yesterday that is, about different publications or different books or what have you that might be important. There's a wonderful book by the young lady from Virgin Islands where it's a book of photographs. Her name is Chalana. Yes, and she's done these amazing sort of contemporary, I have to call them sculptures of Madras headpieces. And she's then affixed different objects into the piece to sort of make a statement. It's fascinating. So, and there's this, there's an Instagram account called My Madras Official. It's not mine, but I just love it. I think it's great. Because it looks at things Madras as well. So you could probably follow that. But really and truly, it's going to take, this is the slow boat that we're taking because we want to do it as thoroughly as we can. But those are the ways to keep connected.
Great. Thank you for that, Jonathan. And so from Amir Hall, what would you say, Sonja, is the relationship between Caribbean waist movements and others around the world, such as African American and African practices? That kind of, when you were mentioning your interest with the waist, I went straight to Joale Bati moves of urban women.
Yeah.
And and it's the center of so much of what we do in terms of our movement structure. So what do you see as that relationship, Sonja?
I think it's the intent. What happens is that I think you can look it up on YouTube as well. It's a talk called The Hip as a Weapon: Negotiating Power and Identity in the Trinidad and Tobago Wine. Okay. And it looks specifically at what the Trinidad and Tobago wine means to Trinidad and Tobago, right? And I locate it in the whole sort of trope of resistance to oppression. Because I even in one of my academic moments, I had done an extensive survey of people and asking them, why do you wine? Okay. And, you know, not a lot came back because I want to be sexy or sexual. It came back because I want to be free. And that's, to me, crux of it right there. See? There's a moment of freedom that is experienced by the person who's whining in the context in which I'm talking about in terms of the Trinidad and Tobago history, post-colonial history, what have you, that I think is a sort of a trajectory to liberation, to that moment of just feeling that
just like a Lego.
it's a Lego, you know, and that is I think it now. Is it the same in other cultures? I think it is. It could be in some instances, but I think it is also, because I remember a lot of the Bantu movements, I think, are the ones that we have really adopted, as far as my research has told me, in terms of the hip and the isolation of the hip and so forth. And so, I mean, we are not the sole repository of hip movements, in the world. But if you compare to, say, hula, or because there's sacred hula and there's also this sort of presentational hula, if you will. There's belly dancing, which of course the hip is very involved in that. There's the African American movement of the hip as well. Yes, there might be similarities, but I think that in our space, it has to do with that conversation about freedom and resistance.
And I would add, Sonia, even this idea of agency, the notion that, that kind of agential power, that a woman could be there whining on her own, a next woman could be with her, a man could be with her, and when she's done whining, she could just step off and walk, right?
Listen, I love that.
It's like stand up and whine and just be in it, and you could take a piece for a moment and then you go on through and you walk on and you continue.
Exactly.
So that idea of transcendence and agency and power and liberation, that it's not something that's far and out there. You could exhibit it and inhabit it in the moment.
Yes, precisely. I think that is our power right there.
Indeed. So we have time for one more question before I ask you for your closing thoughts, Sonia. So from Annalie, can you say more about your more recent shift into filmmaking, script writing, and the kind of any potential overlap with your dance practice? So for example, how do these two art forms impact your thinking, your choreography, and your art making, your creative process?
Yes. Well, aside from what I said before in terms of choreographing the film, using the rhythm, in most practices, it doesn't matter if you're writing, doesn't matter if you are creating something for a stage. And I dare say for the little bit of sort of costume making that I've done, etc., it applies to that also. You're looking for the totality of something, okay? But essentially, it starts with how you put the pieces together, the rhythm of those things together. I have a friend he's literally a rocket scientist, right? That's what he does. And I said to him, we went to college together, and I saw him a few years ago, and I said to him, what exactly is rocket science that people have made this statement about, well, it's not rocket science. What does that really mean? Because I want to know what rocket science is. Why is it so different that people say it's not rocket science? And he said, well, in rocket science, he was simplifying it, of course. He was saying that, you have to make sure that every single part fits together just right and calibrated just right so that the rocket will not go off balance, etc., etc. I said, well, that's choreography. So I think that it's not one always, whatever I'm doing, be it choreographing, be it doing the film or what have you, I come from a place of dance and a place of rhythm of that nature. So I will use that as my foundation. But at the end of the day, I'm doing the rocket science of trying to put all the pieces together so that there's a satisfying whole at the end of it. Okay? The whole thing must try and fit together so that it is, I'm not saying people have to love it. People have looked at my choreography and said, I don't know what you were doing there, no, Sonia.
Indeed.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
Because I prefer that than you telling me, oh, it's nice. What does that mean?
Yeah, it means absolutely nothing.
If it affected you so much that you were puzzled by it, or, you know, oh God, what is that? That's too heavy.
Off guard,
or,
right.
Oh, it was wonderful. Then I've done something to move you emotionally, which means the pieces were just right.
Right. Right. So we are just about out of time, but I do want you to share any closing words before I just announce what's to come in this coming Friday. So you want to leave us with anything, a kernel of Sonia that we could hold on to?
Well, the advice I could give that, I mean, we're in a moment now that is very challenging. And what I've elected to do is, instead of doing less, I'm doing more. I can't go in the studio, which is extremely frustrating, right? And I can't commune with my filmmaker friends and my dance fraternity as I normally do. And I'm sure a lot of us feeling that frustration. But use the moment to go more deeply inside, to figure out stuff, to sit outside. I mean, you know, they're right outside now. I don't know if you're hearing them, but they're a set of parrots.
The birds, yeah.
You know.
Making pure noise.
So I mean, you know, they're there for me to pay attention to now and figure out maybe my next choreographic move. You know, take inspiration by what is around you, not what you're missing. As that creative kind of use your creative spirit to the best that you can in this moment that is more than challenging for a lot of us, but it is still something of where you can find beauty and where you can find yourself in a different way.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And so with those words, those inspiring words, we come to the close of our first set of discussions today, first with Jonathan and now with Sonja Dumas, who's closed us out this Tuesday evening. I'd like to express thanks to you and thanks to all of our listeners and to our Catapult partners, the American Friends of Jamaica, the American Friends of Jamaica, Kingston Creative, and Fresh Milk, again, for making this happen, for creating this platform for exchange. Please be reminded to join us for Catapult Lockdown virtual session number 2, or 3 rather, on Friday. That's this coming Friday on October 2nd. We'll convene at 1 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. And this time we would be in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean with Gina Jimenez Soriel from the Dominican Republic, who will be in dialogue with Helen Ceballo from Puerto Rico, as well as Sandra Vivas from Dominica. So we will be crossing our linguistic divides once more and having a wonderful conversation. So be reminded to lock in to our virtual lockdown salon to be continued on this coming Friday. So thanks again, Sonia, and to all of you. Thank you for joining us. And until
Thanks
the next.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
See you.